Today, when so much is dominated by Brexit, the reality is that there are other issues that are not getting the attention that they should. Last Thursday, with Deputy Gino Kenny, I had the opportunity to raise the Kurdish issue with the Taoiseach. So we have a president who will abandon the Kurds to satisfy some supporters, and now recently he's bringing in sanctions against Turkey in order to satisfy other supporters. And in the middle of all of that, we have the horrendous suffering of those who have already suffered so much because of the war in Syria, because of ISIS atrocities, and because of displacement. And it was the Kurdish Peshmerga forces who defended parts of Iraq against ISIS when those areas were abandoned by the Iraqi government, the Iraqi army. And we know the history of the Kurdish people. It's one of abandonment over many years, with the result that they don't have a nation of their own, so they're scattered in a number of countries. And they're treated horrifically in most of those countries, but especially in Turkey, where their right to their own language, their culture, the right to land, the right to jobs are just eroded. President Erdogan's motives are highly suspect. His own popularity, we know, his own ego took a bruising in the mayoral contest in Istanbul. And we do know that Turkey and the United States are trading partners. And we know the EU reliance on Turkey in terms of refugees, which has been a very lucrative business for them. And of course, they are looking for more money. It's nearly almost, kind of afraid to mention Brexit, because no sooner have you reacted to one aspect of Brexit than we see another aspect appearing. Our Deputy Crowe did host a meeting in the AV room last week with some of the border communities, and they were there, talking about the implications for them. And it's good to meet the ordinary people, rather than the groups and the political groupings and that. We're just talking about the reality in their lives. And then, of course, as others have mentioned, Catalonia. And I know officialdom will say, well, look, this is an internal matter, the independence of the courts, legal system, etc. But Spain is a member of the EU, and the sentences were extremely excessive. There had been no violence on the part of the 12 Catalan political and civil society figures. They weren't planning to assassinate the king or overthrow the central government. This was about a referendum, self-determination for Catalonia. And when you look at the extent of the sentences, 13 years, 12 years, 11 and a half, 10 and a half, 9, and then fines for 3 others. And it was about freedom of speech, it was about peaceful protest, rights that we just take for granted here, as is the right to self-determination. And it would have to come to the conclusion that those sentences were really acts of vengeance rather than justice. And yet Spain has endorsed international treaties that have granted territories the right to self-determination, but it's chosen a penal route for those wanting Catalan independence. And you'd have to ask, how does jailing these Catalan leaders resolve the issue? Because the Spanish Criminal Code does not say that holding a referendum is a crime, but that's how the courts interpret it, and the sentences are very disproportionate. They're going to deepen tensions, and we see that already, and it's going to make a bad situation worse. OK, there seems to be a majority in Catalonia who want independence, but there are plenty there who don't want independence, and certainly any of the pro-independence Catalan people I've met, all they want is the referendum, and they're very clear that they will accept the results of a referendum, even if it is against independence for Catalonia. But again, we need a peaceful way to do this. I think it's a very sad day for democracy when those sentences were announced. So if the EU can't come out and condemn what's happening, then at least they would come out and show some of their concern. And just to finish, I know that the meeting is going to be setting the priorities. I saw the list that were there already. I do think we can't forget about the Sustainable Development Goals. They're a major issue. The clock is running down on them. The budget is going to be very, very significant, and we know how much groups in the north depend on the EU funding, whether it's Interreg or Erasmus or whatever, and the work that funding has enabled those programmes to do. And then on enlargement, we just came from meeting a delegation from Montenegro, and you're listening to those people there, and they so much want to be part of the EU, respect for values, but then on the other hand, we're seeing where those values are just being completely undermined and allowed to be undermined. So it is difficult days, very, very difficult days, but the big issue is to stop the violence and the suffering that has been caused by Turkey and the United States.